Hello, I'm Alan Clements. Today I want to talk to you about Cascades Gardens, my garden here in Bonsall, Matlock in Derbyshire. It's taken me 22 years to create this wonderful garden. It's for meditation and well-being. Now it's 4 acres with cliffs, waterfalls, streams and lots of planting. But what I want to talk about today particularly was the background to the garden. And I've been lucky enough to travel the world. I suppose I must have been to more than 35 different countries, particularly Japan, China and India. And in that time I've been lucky enough to be interested in and become aware of the different cultures and religions in those countries. And I've been fascinated by the culture of Japan and Zen Buddhism. I trained in Zen meditation. I was lucky enough to meet the Dalai Lama a number of times and became the chairman of the Tibet Society and Relief Fund. And in my meetings with him, learned a lot about Tibetan Buddhism. And all this led me to creating a garden that was very peaceful and natural and relaxing for meditation. So it's been a long journey. And what I want to talk about is really, as much as anything, it's the spiritual journey that I've gone through as I've created the garden, because what I realized very quickly is that this is where we're most peaceful, in our gardens, and it's been a very interesting opportunity to relax and be part of nature. Well, very recently, my wife and I took our little daughter, she's 4.5, to the local primary school, and it was to be her induction, her welcome visit. And I was intrigued to see on the window ledge of the junior class a whole row of jam jars filled with water, and they all had a broad bean in it. And I remember from back when I was 5, a similar age, we were all given a jam jar, blotting paper and a bean to germinate and watch it grow. And I don't know whether at that age, of course, I was aware really that I was witnessing the very essence of life and growth and renewal and the significance of that. But it did leave me with a feeling of always being rather in awe of nature. Now, when I was a teenager, I was introduced to the music of Delius, and I don't know whether you've heard his music, but it's very much, he lived in the 1930s, and he was writing music about his inspiration that he felt in nature. The sound of a cuckoo in spring, summer night on the river, and so on. And I was very taken by this sort of music, and it filled me with an inspiration, and I just felt that somewhere out there in the countryside there were answers to my questions about life's meaning. I was also lucky enough to travel in India, and I've traveled all over India for various reasons, and lucky enough to see Everest, the highest mountain, which I was totally in awe of, and the view from that at 16,000 feet has I've never forgotten that feeling. But also the open plains of India were just breathtaking, and somehow I just felt that the country was a very spiritual place. Nature was spiritual, and all of life went on within it. Well, I was also lucky enough to go to Tibet, and traveling through Tibet, in 1994 it was, we not only passed through some of the towns of Tibet, but finally our goal was to get to a beautiful lake at 15,000 feet, where we camped as a small group of people. And we camped by this lakeside, beautiful, huge expanse of blue water, surrounded by 24,000-foot mountains. And I was totally taken by this enormous, vast, but yet beautiful landscape. One day I walked up the hillside behind our campsite and looked down on this, maybe I climbed about 500 feet, looked down on this beautiful blue water, and it was just so peaceful and relaxing. And then, to my surprise, circling over my head, there was this eagle, and it was just a magical moment. I just felt so much at peace, and it was the first time I really felt at peace with the countryside. Well, I've always been very interested in the deeper questions of life. What's life all about? How did the universe start? That sort of thing. And what are we here for? And this led me to doing a degree in, this part of my degree was philosophy and psychology. And I was very taken by the subject and read far too much on Buddhism and not enough on my curricula. But this led me to studying existentialism and the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. He talked about being and nothingness, and also the philosophy of Nietzsche. God is dead, beyond good and evil, and things like that. And this I found very helpful, and I did a thesis on the concept of a person. What are we? Who are we? I learned about body and mind and spirit. But I have to say that the one thing I didn't really understand, and it didn't help me understand my own spirituality, is there something deeper inside us? Are we more than just body and mind? So this has always been at the back of my mind. When I was about 35, I was married to a very lovely French lady, and we had a son. He's now 40. And then sadly she miscarried our second child, a young girl baby. And later on after that was a sad time, but later on after that she actually died pretty horribly of liver cancer. And this really threw me. I really couldn't understand how someone so beautiful and caring could actually die in such a horrible way at 35 years old. And it took me a long time to get to grips with that, and I just felt I needed help. So I thought, well, I'll try and get some help from, well, who else could it be but the Dalai Lama? Well, my family fell about laughing, and they said, well, you'll never get to see him. But within 6 months, I'd found out how, and I was knocking on his door at 8,000 feet up in northwest India, in a place called Dharamsala, where he has a bungalow. A town has built up around him over the years. Lots of Tibetans from Tibet. Well, I managed to get an audience with him. They said 20 minutes, and I arrived very nervous. And then in his living room, there he was, quite a strong, stocky man, and very powerful looking. I said, well, Your Holiness, can you tell me the meaning of life? Well, he shrugged his shoulders. He said, well, I don't know. And then I realized he was slightly kidding me, sat me down, we had a cup of tea, and he gave me the best talking to of my life. It set me straight, put me back on the path, and I've never really looked back. Well, what did he say? He was basically saying, well, our purpose in life is to be happy, and most importantly, to help others to be happy. And the more we can help others, the more we can be happy ourselves and be satisfied with our lives, give it meaning. He talked quite a lot about hope, and our purpose is to try to make a better world, and there was always hope for that better world. And if we believe in rebirth, as the Tibetan Buddhists do, it gives you a much more happy perspective that by having a good life, having a good karma, as they say, you come back as someone better in a new existence. And at least the world is a better place. Well, on a more serious note, he talked about Buddha nature. And he said, following the Buddhist masters, it's very helpful to try to understand the concept of Buddha nature, the concept of the emptiness of self, that we are all part of the universe and nature, and that we can live a better life by trying to develop that concept of emptiness. Well, as the world becomes more complex and demanding, people are increasingly looking to their gardens for sanctuary and peace of mind. And certainly the NHS, the RHS and the NGS National Garden Scheme are all talking about gardening for health in recent years. And we see more and more community gardens where people can get away from the concrete jungles of the cities, and hospices creating gardens where older people at the last stages of their life can sit and enjoy a beautiful space, die with dignity. Well, certainly gardening is a place to learn about life. It's all about birth, death, renewal. We learn about patience, and everywhere there is the impermanence. One minute there is a beautiful flower, the next minute it's moved on, ready for next season. But there's always that sense of renewal. The weather conditions we've had in recent years have created quite a serious issue about uncertainty of weather conditions, climate change. We never quite know what's happening, and coping with that is all about coping with life. Well, I always had great respect for Jeff Hamilton those years ago when he talked about paradise gardens, and had a super television program where he thought that everybody had the opportunity to create their own bit of paradise, whether they lived in a little courtyard, on a roof, in a city, however big or small their garden was, there was a place to put down a seat, relax, and have a range of flowers and landscaping around them to give them peace of mind, their own part of paradise. Of course, this is not a new idea. It goes right back to the Garden of Eden in the times of the Bible. And of course, in Iran, Persian gardens date back 2,500 years, and the word paradise comes from the Persian language. So we can all create our bit of paradise through our gardens. In my travels to China, I learned about Taoism, spelled T-A-O, and it's a fascinating philosophy that originated in China 4th century before Christ. So it's a very, very old, one of the most fundamental philosophies or religions in China. The concept is that we live in a fundamental unity that is a continuous flow of nature, is the way, the Tao. And if we follow this and go with the Tao, we can have a much easier life. Go with nature, don't fight it. The concept of yin and yang was something I read about and understood a little bit, because this fundamental unity comprises two opposite forces, the yin and the yang. You may have seen this black and white symbol that portrays that. And those two forces together balance each other and create a harmony in life. So you have dark, light, different opposite forces, and so on. And so pain, suffering, and happiness, opposites. But they balance out somehow, and maybe life is like that. So if we can follow the way, if we can get those balances and harmony, we can have a much better life. Now, I was lucky enough in my trip into Japan to go up into the Alps, into the mountains of Japan, and to visit a monastery there called Uheji. And it was an amazing place in the woodlands there, a very ancient monastery of the Soto Zen Buddhist sect. And I was lucky enough to be taken in. They said, well, you've got to take the role of a trainee priest, and you have to abide by our rules. And so I found myself getting into meditation classes and routines in the early hours of the morning, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning. And we were sitting up facing a wall, cross-legged, and the high priest would go round with a big stick. And I wondered what that was about. I thought it was to wake us up at that time of the morning, but no, it was about, you had the choice to ask him to soften the muscles of your shoulders, to relax, and to go into meditation and develop a peace of mind. And Soto Zen teaches us the need to let go through meditation, let go of our ego, to go deep into ourselves and develop a feeling about the fundamental reality of nature, to become one with the universe. Well, from an early age, I was taught by my mother about Christian values and its virtues. In fact, my first book was 1953, I remember, was The Pilgrim's Progress for Children, the book by John Bunyan, of course, from the 17th century, about the journey through life of Christian and all the temptations that he suffered, but how he eventually got to heaven. Well, she always said, well, if you believe in God, he will tell you the way. If you believe in Christ and everything that it tells you, you'll go to heaven. Well, she still feels that to this day, and I respect that. But as I grew up went to university and started to look at different philosophies, religions and ideas, I discovered Buddhism. Well, I found this quite fascinating, and I found it a very helpful way of thinking through life. Of course, the Eightfold Path talks all about developing wisdom and compassion, and training the mind and helping us think in a very positive way, learning meditation, but eventually reaching the state called enlightenment. And I have to say that through my life, I always thought that one day I would get to this state of bliss or enlightenment and move into a different realm. Well, in my university degree, I studied physics as one of the subjects, and I was fascinated by quantum physics. And what has happened in the last 40 years in that area of quantum physics has been quite extraordinary. And if you look at the subject, it's created quite an interesting comparison of ideas with ancient philosophies of Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism. And it's extraordinary how these philosophies from 2,500 years ago seem to be almost being backed up, or there are great similarities with the concepts and theories now of quantum physics and those ancient religions. Well, what quantum physics tells us is that not only are we all made of the same matter, the same neutrons, electrons and minute particles, but that somehow we are all part of the same infinite universe. There's an interconnectedness as well as an interdependency between everything that goes on. So we're all the same sort of matter made from these particles, that act in a wave-like way. We're a sort of energy. We're a universal energy, and the plants, the animals, the humans, and everything, even these wonderful million-year-old rocks that I have in my garden here, we're all made of the same stuff, and we're interconnected. And when I work in nature in the garden, I can actually feel the energy and feel part of that energy in developing this garden. Well, so the universe is a quantum vacuum of consciousness, and that consciousness came before everything, before creation, before everything developed. And so we're all part of the same consciousness. We're aware of it, and we can influence it. And that's the exciting thing to me about quantum physics, is that we can actually influence the way the universe is developing and take a part in it. We can be our own co-creators of the universe. Well, it's taken me a lifetime to enjoy these experiences and to try to understand some of those Western philosophies, as well as to come to terms with Christian values. Certainly, I've put aside the notions of God and heaven and absolute values, things like that, and through meditation, I do believe that I'm starting to come to terms with the idea of a deeper spirit within us that is part of the universe, that we are all one with the universe. Of course, quantum physics tells us how insignificant we are with these billions of universes around us and how tiny we are compared to all of that. But that doesn't mean to say we don't now have a wonderful opportunity to explore life, explore nature, and I certainly find that there are moments when I think nature is absolutely amazing and wonderful and so beautiful. But of course, we've also experienced times of flood and disease and war when we think, well, maybe life isn't quite so good, nature isn't so kind. Nevertheless, through meditation, we can find peace of mind and enjoy the best of nature. As Suzuki says, we become one when we join with nature through meditation. And even the old philosophers of many centuries ago, like Spinoza, was talking about that we can explore and understand and study and mentally consider the physical side of life in order to get closer to the spiritual. Well, does the universe have a purpose? Certainly, the scientists are never going to give us the answers. Our own search for meaning remains a process of self-discovery, and we have the opportunity to choose our path, and it's more meaningful if we are there to help others, try to make the world a better place, and be compassionate. I certainly think that compassion and love are central to our happiness. Well, in the last 22 years, I've been developing my garden here, Cascades, and trying to use Buddhist principles of stillness, harmony, respect for living things, and so on. And certainly it's been something of a spiritual journey in creating this beautiful place. I believe gardens are meant to be sat in, the idea of zazen, of just sitting, very much so for meditation. And we have seats all the way around the garden, some 15 or so, with lovely nooks and crannies and places to sit and relax. Everywhere you can hear the sound of water, and you can immerse yourself in nature and celebrate nature. Well, we're now lucky enough to have thousands of visitors every year to the garden, and we have a visitor's book, and we often get to chat about people's ideas of the garden. But I was particularly taken one day with a Danish lady left a comment in the visitor's book. She said, "Beautiful and soothing your garden, with gifts for your eyes in every corner, and every sight shows you that nature is the great creator of harmony and balance." And I really appreciated that comment. Of course, another day, a lady from a local village came and said, "Well, Ayop Midok, you've got a bit of paradise here." Well, during the day, the sun comes out and warms up the cliffs and rocks that we have around us. And I often feel in the evenings when I'm sitting quietly in the garden at twilight, you can almost feel that energy coming out of those rocks. But there's also a fabulous peace and stillness in the garden, which gives it a beautiful spiritual feeling. Cascades Gardens is the perfect place to meditate and find peace of mind.